What's going on, everybody? This is Justin with Primal Scales, and today, with the help of my good buddy Matt Berger over at Berger's Blades, we're going to show you the best way to shape and finish a set of the Primal Scales laminated graphic scales. This particular set was a thin blue line design, and it went on a sweet little everyday carry Tonto style that Matt made for a customer of his. So without further ado, let's get started. So Matt already has the scales cut out to rough shape, epoxy to the tang, and secured with some G10 pins. The first step is going to be removing the excess handle material to get it flush with the tang. Matt's using a disc sander with an 80 grit sanding disc to hit the flat and outside curves of the handle. Make sure to square your table to the disc to ensure the best results. From there, it's onto the belt sander with a small contact wheel to hit the finger groove or other harder to reach areas. Once again, we're still using 80 grit at this stage to quickly remove material. You'll notice that this low grit sandpaper will cause some material buildup on the edges. This is completely normal at this stage. Now that the scales are flush with the tang, we're going to go ahead and switch to a 120 grit belt and start contouring the scales. It's always good to either mark out on the scales where you want to remove material to, or stop and inspect regularly to ensure that you end up with a symmetrical handle. And now, as you can see here, we have the rough contouring complete, so it's time to start smoothing out the sharp edges. Matt's now switched over to a 120 grit scallop belt to prevent cutting ridges into the scales, and will work the handle over the slack portion of the belt. This stage of the process is all about blending out those sharp corners. Be sure to stop as needed and feel how the handle is progressing. You can always take off more material, but you cannot put it back on. It's time for another belt change, this time to a 1 inch wide scallop belt to allow us to smooth out and further contour the finger groove, or any other tighter inside radiuses the handle may have. Next up, we've moved to a 220 grit scallop belt to give the handle contour its final refinement. To finish out on this belt and remove the scratches from the coarser belts used previously, Matt is changing up the direction and using very little pressure while sanding the opposite direction as before. Doing this really helps make hand sanding later on a little bit easier. Now we're on to our final stop on the belt sander, and it's back to the small contact wheel with a 220 grit belt. This allows us to clean up the tang of the knife, once again cutting down on the amount of elbow grease needed during hand sanding. Moving on to everyone's favorite part of the process, it's time to hand sand. We're using a progression of sandpaper going from 220, 400, 600, 800, and finally 1500 grit. Make sure to wipe off the handle from time to time and inspect it to see where you've missed any scratches from the previous grits. As you're sanding, vary the direction you sand. This will make the process go quicker and give a better end result. Once we finish with hand sanding, it's over to the buffer to bring the scales to life. We're starting out with a white buffing compound and working the handle over the wheel, making sure to hit all surfaces as we go along. After that, Matt moves to a pink buffing compound to really bring out that shine. Remember to always use separate buffing wheels for your different compounds. And now it's time for the final step in finishing off our scales. A few coats of Axe Wax gives it a great visual finish as well as a great feel in the hand. You can also apply a clear coat at this stage if you prefer, but in my experience, that can wear in an irregular fashion, especially on a knife that will see heavy use. Time for the final reveal, and I gotta say these scales really complement the Stonewash Tonto, and we must take a second and appreciate how crisp those grinds are. Great job, Matt at Berger's Blades. Really appreciate your help in making this for everyone watching. I hope that you've enjoyed the video, found it useful, and make sure to consider a set of Primal scales for your next knife.